Hi everyone and welcome to Asami Rat Care. So today's video is going to be all about choking in rats. It's something that happens to us all at some point and we'll probably all panic about it at least the first time, probably the second, maybe the third and so on. But it's something that it's really important to know what to do and more importantly when to do it. Basically choking is when a rat kind of inhales a bit of food, it gets stuck in the kind of respiratory system, normally in the throat somewhere, and basically causes them to have difficulty breathing or to kind of feel uncomfortable, distressed by it, etc. Can be quite stressful for the rats involved. It can definitely be stressful for the owners involved. Usually the rats actually deal with it better than we do, but it's something that is important to understand and to understand what you can do about this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly stop talking and I'm going to play you a video of a friend's rat who recently choked her. She's an old lady, bless her, and she was getting her month-day treat and decided to choke on it just like rats tend to. But it's quite a good example because she's stuck choking not extremely severely but fairly severely, and it'll just give you an idea of the kind of things to look for. So I'll just pause now and we'll go over to that. Right, as you can see from that video, it's kind of quite distressing to watch. The rat's clearly uncomfortable. She's gasping there, so that's a sign that it's a fairly bad choke. You can get minor chokes where the rat looks just like it's kind of pulling a funny face, pull its ears back a bit. It'll kind of like look a bit uncomfortable. It may actually look like it's throwing up. Rats don't throw up. They can regurgitate, which is something that's gone down the wrong way, that they basically cough up. It's a kind of result of choking sometimes. But it's something that can range from those very mild symptoms to what you saw to, in extreme cases, a rat that's kind of absolutely panicking over it. Now the girl in that video wasn't panicking. She was not happy about it particularly, but she wasn't extremely distressed and her owner did the right thing to deal with it. So what do we do when we see a rat choking like that? Now the first thing to do is to look and see whether the rat can breathe. So that's quite fundamental. So what you're looking for signs that the rats can't actually breathe, and it's not the gasping. So that rat in that video could breathe perfectly well. She was struggling and finding it quite difficult, but she could breathe. So she was clearly breathing. In a rat that isn't breathing, you will notice them get probably very, very panicky. But again, panic alone is not a sign that they can't breathe. But also they will then very quickly become very lethargic. They will probably end up lying on one side, gasping. Their extremities will go cold. That's a sign that things are very serious. And I will say that's also very rare. In the years that I've been owning rats, which is well over 30 now, I have never once had a choke that's resulted in the rat being unable to breathe. So I'll come to that last because that's least likely to happen. So if your rat isn't in that situation, if your rat is kind of able to breathe but showing signs of choking, what should you do? So the number one thing you should do is leave them be, and this is something that I really should stress. A lot of people's instinct is to get into there to see if they can help in any way, shape or form. You want to fix your rat, it's natural. You're really worried the rat's distressed or mildly uncomfortable if it's a very mild choke, and it's natural to want to intervene. So you want to pick them up, grab them, see if you can help them to fix them. But genuinely, if you do that, you're likely to make it worse. So in the majority of choke cases, your best bet is to leave the rat alone. If they're flinging themselves around a massive cage, risking injuring themselves and others, you can very quickly put them in a small safe cage, like the kind of hospital cages we typically use. But that's it. And then I would recommend leaving the room. And this also sounds counterintuitive. You want to watch, you want to make sure your rat continues to breathe and that it's fine. But genuinely, if it's going to block something, it will generally block it at the start. Unless there's something completely different going on. Some people can mistake a fit, for instance, for choking. Though they are actually quite different when you see them. They've not got that kind of same retching face that they pull. They kind of like pull their ears back and look like they're kind of trying to throw up. I guess that's my ear, Chocobo. But yes, so that's the kind of thing you'd be looking out for, and that's what you should do. You should leave them alone. So some people's instincts is to run straight to the vets, and in the case where the rat is unable to breathe, to be fair, you're probably not going to have time to do that. But in the cases where the rat is choking clearly and uncomfortable with it, in the vast majority of cases, there's no use going to the vets, and in some cases it can be harmful. And I say that because some vets will feel that they have to intervene in some way, that they have to try and make it better too. So, and that is partly because they feel that you're coming to see them with the expectation that they'll do that. Vets that are used to rats and choking won't do that, because they'll understand that every rat I've had that has choked has cleared it themselves, and they're very good at it. They do get a bit stressed sometimes, but they just settle down after a while and they will clear it. It can take 10 minutes, it can take 5 minutes, it can take a few hours sometimes, but they will clear it. But sometimes vets feel they have to intervene, and I've seen cases before where vets have gone in to try and clear something out of there, so they've knocked the rat out, which is always a little bit dodgy if you've got a rat that's struggling in breathing a bit. And then they've kind of physically gone in there and moved a small bit of food that's gone down the wrong way. The problem is there's generally complications to doing that. So typically the vets will cause damage on the inside of the esophagus, and not esophagus, sorry, trachea, and that can actually then cause ongoing problems. What is worth doing is, if you've had a rat that's choked for a while and then the next day they're kind of like showing signs of respiratory problems, then that's the time to go for the vets, because one of the complications of choking is that they can kind of aspirate something. So that means while they're choking they've actually got something into their lungs, and that can cause aspiration pneumonia, which is a really nasty respiratory infection. Well, it can range from kind of fairly mild to full-blown pneumonia. So it's something that you need to bear in mind. And if you see respiratory symptoms after a choking, and it's normally a day or two after, I'm not talking about like that second, because they're likely to be a little bit hoarse for a while afterwards. They have had something stuck in their throat. But that's when you go and see the vets. You don't really want to put the vet in the situation where they feel they have to try and kind of fiddle around and move something and potentially cause damage, because then you can get ongoing respiratory problems for the rest of the rat's life, caused by scarring, irritation, etc. It can cause quite a lot of swelling in there. So that's the kind of first response, i.e. do nothing unless you absolutely have to. Now I'm going to, the reason Chocobo's here, it's going to be my demonstration. I'm going to show you what to do in the very rare situation where a rat can't breathe. Now, some of you may have heard about the rat fling. The rat fling's the kind of like rat equivalent of the Heimlich manoeuvre for humans. You should only do it in the situation where genuinely that rat is going to die if you don't do it. And the reason I say that is because there's quite a lot of force going through the body and you can risk injury. So I'm obviously not going to do this properly, because I don't want to hurt Chocobo, and she's definitely not choking currently, she's mostly licking. But the main things that we want to do when we're doing the rat fling is we want to make sure we're holding the rat, and we want to use one hand to support the head and neck, and we're holding that quite firmly. Now, it's not going to be easy with Chocobo because she's not kind of like limp and lifeless like you would find a rat who wasn't able to breathe. So you'd be getting that kind of bit and making sure that you're supporting the full neck. And the reason you do that is you're going to be swinging her through the air, so you have to make sure that they're not going to get effectively whiplash or damage the head and neck. And the other part of, you want to hold the back end, so kind of hold it around the tail, around the legs, so you've got quite a firm hold on that. So then once you've got a kind of good hold of the rat, what you're doing, but you want to be doing a lot faster than me, put it to the full extent of your kind of arms, and then you want to swing down rapidly to the kind of end of your reach, and then come to an abrupt stop. Now that kind of swinging motion will put quite a lot of force in it. Coming to the stop should dislodge anything in there. The problem is when it's doing that dislodging, like I say, there's quite a lot of force going through it, which means that there is a fair chance that that rat is going to get some damage when that particle comes out of their throat. So that is another reason why it's not an ideal thing to do, unless that particle is literally stopping them breathing. It's better for them to kind of cough it up themselves, much like for us, if we kind of like get something stuck in our throat, we're generally better coughing it up. Right, so that's what you do in an emergency. So we've got through the kind of choking incident. The only other case I want to talk about is the cases where you've left the rats for, let's say, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 to 8 hours, and they're still making choking motions. Usually at that point it won't be as severe, but also usually at that point the rat will be quite lethargic, they'll be quite limp. That is another time you want to go to the vet, because there are some cases where actually it's not choking, it's something else. I remember a friend's rat, he was choking for about 12 hours. When I say choking, he was choking actions for about 12 hours. Took her to a vet, his vet had a really good look around, kind of like looked down the throat, etc. And they found that he had a massively swollen inside of his throat, that he'd had a really strong allergic reaction. Now that is very rare, and that's the only case I've come across like that. But it is feasible there could be something else causing it. There are a lot of kind of glands and stuff around the throat. One thing I should say you can also sometimes notice with choking is a lot of drooling, and that's actually to help them get stuff out. It's kind of a useful response in some respects. But yes, so that can come into the game as well. If it's going on for a long period of time, then you want to get the vet to check it out and see whether there is anything. But if they don't have to kind of start diving in there and trying to pull things out, it's better not to. And the vet may choose to give you something like anti-inflammatories to see whether the inflammation can come under control. So the rat that had the allergic reaction, the vet recommended kind of anti-inflammatories, trying to get it under control. 2 days later, he was still making the symptoms, and they put to sleep and found that there's actually quite a lot of kind of swollen tissue. It's a kind of massive reaction, very unusual. And again, like I say, I haven't seen it since. But yes, so that's kind of the thing to think about for longer term choking. And then, like I say, over the next day or two after your rat's recovered from its choking, you want to keep an eye out for respiratory symptoms. Any comes along, treat it. It's one that I probably wouldn't wait around and see whether it fixes itself, because it is generally a sign that something's got into the lungs from the situation. It's actually quite common in young babies. You see it sometimes. They get so enthusiastic about wet food that they just scoff it, and then they kind of choke on it a bit. The other thing to bear in mind is some rats will be prone to choking. Now, whether this is something that's kind of like caused by their first choking incident where they've damaged something, which they can cause scratches, and that can cause scar tissue, which makes it more likely for them to choke, or whether it's a bit like some humans that are genetically prone to choking. I'm lethal, I can choke on fresh air and water. It's a bit of a pain in the neck, even when I'm drinking carefully. But yes, you can get rats that are like that, and it's something that you'll always have to be aware, and you'll probably notice it fairly regularly. And it gets to the point where the rat's quite used to it, they're not particularly worried by it. It's just kind of one of those things that happen. But yes, so keep an eye out for rats like that. In my group now, Moomin's chokes occasionally. Not as bad as some of them had, but she is prone to it now and again. So I keep an eye out, but hers are all very minor, which is quite nice. I'd far rather see minor than something stressful for us both. Trying to think of what else I should mention on choking. I think that's probably the main things really. It really is to reinforce that leave the rat alone. And the reason I say leave the room as well is because our stress adds to the rat's stress, and it's in a stressful situation. It really needs to just lie down and kind of like work things through itself. And if we're in there fussing around, or that temptation to take the rat out and have it on our knee so we can reassure it, genuinely we're not. We're adding to its stress because we're physically so stressed. Rats are very perceptive creatures, and they can pick up when you're stressed, and they will kind of increase their anxiety, particularly as generally we're quite kind of like a leading presence to them. A bit like how if an alpha in a cage is poorly or stressed or upset, the rats in the cage will kind of be affected by that. We sometimes kind of fill an almost similar role, not quite alpha, but we have that kind of effect on them a lot more strongly than other things. So really must stress, leave the room if you're sure that that rat is fine, able to breathe. Even if you're very stressed and worried, you should do that. It's the best thing you can do for them, and they will honestly clear them in the vast majority of cases. So that's over and out from me and from Chocobo, who is looking very chipper after her lumpectomy and spay a little while ago. I'm very pleased with her. So I thought you'd actually some of you that have been following Chocobo's story from her first mammary tumours and then more recently with her kind of like massive second mammary tumour will be quite pleased to see her looking kind of fit and well. I'm very pleased to see it. Right, so that's over and out from me and over and out from Chocobo, and I hope that was useful.